Asking. Y'all betting? What's poppin', GG's? What's good, the Dada? Merry Christmas. Hope y'all had a good holiday.
Aluminum-free deodorant for kids, feet, and more isn't a myth, it's native.
So how did I feel? I didn't feel. I wasn't even thinking about it. I just was like, let me go get this Rachel Ray off the ground and turn that into $100 million company, which I did. That nobody talks about.
What made you take a chance?
Because two things. Dean was getting ready. We thought he was going to go to jail for a couple of years. He was on trial. So I was trying to make 4 albums for him, or 5, so that if he went to jail, because every time if you sold 500,000 records, I could give you $1 million advance. So if I already have 5 albums that each went gold, while he was in jail, I could always make sure he had 500 grand. I was just trying to get it all done. And Kanye wouldn't give him any beats. That was one reason. And the other reason why is I had spent like 500,000-600,000 with Rockware's money developing his line, Pastel. I still got the samples. And all of a sudden he was like, I don't like him no more, and he was starting Kanye out. And that was it. I was done. So I was like, man, you gotta get out. I was tight. So the change, you know what I mean? People feel my interview talks about that. Like, damn, you got Kanye. I don't feel it. I had done so much to fight for him, it was like, what more can I do? So I just felt like I can't be arguing. I don't care how many records and stuff. And that was before that was like the first time. I was more bothered when Beans chose to go with Jay. That one hurt. Because I've done a lot and prepared. I chose State Property over Rockware. And I wanted to just roll out with State Property. It almost like you tricked Beans to shelf him. They like up to me doing that. But I had them. You know what I mean? Like, that was my new Jay. Like, I look at them like NWA. I like the clothes better than Rockware. They had Beans trying to, like, I forgot, I hate when I forget people's names, but the person that was like my partner in doing the licensing for State Property, because sales was telling them that, Rockwell was doing this, that, and the third, that State Property should be more like Rockwell as opposed to being more like Jiggy Car, which is the way I designed it. And they started signing off on behind my back. It was like, I bet wrong on that one. That might be something I would have done different.
So you feel like if Bean would have went with you instead of Jay, his career would have
But it's not even, it's bad playing for them.
been also for now.
Like I had the movie, right? I had the clothing line. Clothing line was doing 20 million a year. So we had the movies, the touring, the clothing line. You gotta remember, like, I activated all of those things. Like, I was making beans when I was talking to Cam about being the vice president, talking to him. I was also talking to Beans. I was making both of them vice presidents because they had labels. I was the one that was strategically growing and planting seeds for to grow their businesses, whether they knew it or not. Whether they knew it was in their best interest or not, I was still doing it. So I made sure everybody had their own movie. Everybody had their own clothing line. Remember, Cam had a fragrance. He had Old Boy a fragrance. I did that. Back then, could you imagine if that would have stayed? If they wouldn't have, nobody wants to listen to me.
Pizza to the 28th. Saturday, pizza to the 28th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. We're going. Man,
Mainstream historians will tell you that the Great Pyramid of Giza was a glorified tomb for the Egyptian pharaohs. The only monument left of the original seven wonders of the world, this structure was created with impeccable mathematical precision and is a unique, mysterious feat of construction and of engineering. There's only one problem. The Great Pyramid has none of the characteristics of tombs, including extravagant artifacts, ornate wall art, sealed entrances, elaborate coffins, or even mummies themselves. It was, however, built with unique materials, the same materials that are used today for electrical conductivity. These facts are leading more and more historians to believe the pyramids may have had a far more useful purpose. The Pyramid of Giza was not at all a tomb, but a power plant, generating and transmitting electricity to the civilization surrounding it. Impossible? Join the universe inside you for a closer look. To start, it's important to comprehend the tremendous effort that went into creating these monuments. The pyramids of Giza are among no less than 118 of these structures in Egypt alone. And that doesn't even include those pyramids in other parts of the world. Given our current understanding of how early civilizations built their monuments, it would have taken no less than 20 years to build these so-called tombs. And that's if no less than 20,000 workers worked daily. To this day, historians still can't prove exactly how or when they were built. This leads us to ask, what resting place for the dead could possibly be so important that it would warrant such phenomenal effort, time, and precise engineering? Even without knowing, they have nothing in common with regular tombs. You only need to stand before them to realize that's a lot of work for a cadaver. Naturally, we make conclusions based on the assumption that ancient civilizations were more primitive than us. But what if intellectual evolution isn't always linear? Can advanced technology be lost and rediscovered centuries later? Is it possible that an ancient culture had knowledge of and used electrical power?
That's what happened.
To know for sure, let's look at another case where technology, power generation, appears to have been used and then forgotten. We know Edison and Tesla brought electricity into common use, moving into the 20th century. Yet, in Iraq in 1934, 3 artifacts were found together: a ceramic pot, a tube of copper, and a rod of iron which, when combined with a liquid acid, can be used to create chemical reactions that produce an electrical charge. Known as the Baghdad or Parthian battery, these materials date back 2,000 years. 10 years after their discovery, someone using grape juice with similar materials successfully generated a few volts of electricity. This process has since been demonstrated on the Discovery Channel's program Mythbusters, where lemon juice activated the electrochemical reaction between the copper and the iron, producing 4 volts of electricity. Nowadays, you can simply search online to find instructions on how to create your own battery using these chemical principles. But historians have long assumed that thousands of years ago there was no knowledge of this technology, that this archaeological find is mere coincidence, even though we've long marveled over artifacts with intricate gold plating, which requires electricity to be created. Quite simply, energy generation happens as a result of simple chemical properties and can be done by anyone with 4 basic materials. So, here are some important facts about the structure and the materials of the pyramid. For starters, it contains angled tunnels which lead not only into the pyramid but deep underground to areas claimed still to be unexplored. What tomb needs a shaft directed into the earth? We also know that centuries ago, There were enormous swivel doors that weighed no less than 20 tons.
Well,
But miraculously, it was so well engineered, it could be moved to enter with a push of a hand. Since no Egyptian tomb has ever been found to be deliberately accessible, what was their
so you can get back.
in continuing to visit the mummies, or could such a door have served the purpose of perhaps containing and insulating the space inside? Though you'd almost never know it, the Great Pyramids of Giza were once covered in white polished limestone.
I want some show the pyramids.
The cuts made in this
Yeah, there was that shit was electric. That's for electricity.
so it would have a smooth, flat appearance. This would have made the giant structures brightly reflect the light of the sun like a mirror. It also would have made perfect
Nah,
insulation
nigga,
of
that's
the
electric.
structure.
That's for electricity.
A large earthquake in 1303 disrupted the casing stones, and they were removed to use on
They're
other
not in
structures.
there.
Today, all that remains is
They never found no mummies in the pyramids, bro. Mummies was never
image of the
found. No
incredible
gold, no
amount of
mummies.
light that would have reflected
Never.
from the monument raises curiosity,
That
as
shit's made
does
up,
the
bro.
reason for the insulation. Was there a desire to draw attention to their dead?
Why you think I'm still
Mummies
searching
warm,
up on the pyramids,
or
nigga?
perhaps something else.
I was like, what the fuck? If no
Next,
mummies was found,
material,
what the
dolomite,
fuck was these
was
shits
used
for?
on the inner surfaces. Dolomite is known to increase electrical conductivity directly relative to the amount of pressure on it. High pressure creates more electrical current. Next, lining the passageways and underground tunnels of the pyramids is granite, which is slightly radioactive. Granite contains high amounts of quartz crystal with metal, and it's a well-known conductor of piezoelectricity. Piezoelectricity occurs as a result of stress or pressure on the quartz, as demonstrated by the wristwatches, which can be charged simply by rapidly shaking. This granite actually ionizes the air inside the pyramid, creating a chemical reaction which, again, increases the conductivity of electricity. When such electrons are given a chance to bypass sections of rock via metal wire, quite large currents can flow. Another important material used to construct them is the mysterious mortar, 500,000 tons of it, which holds the giant stones in place. Though it's been analyzed many times, modern technology has yet to exactly recreate this gypsum, which comes from sediment. This gypsum can withstand tremendous pressure, and astoundingly is even stronger than
Nah,
the
you're right though.
stones
The
themselves.
rocks that I made, the
Clearly,
shit
it's
that's made
contributed
with the
to keeping
pyramids
the
though,
monument
it's
intact for thousands
mysterious.
of years.
They don't got
Could there
that
be another
rock no
reason
more.
why they used a material
That's crazy.
which could withstand such high pressure? So, limestone, dolomite, granite, supposedly constructed for a tomb, are, in fact, analogous to the exact materials we use to make electrical wires. They also share a relationship with pressure, which increases their electroconductivity. Just northwest of the Great Pyramid is the Serapeum. Here there are 20 huge granite boxes, each weighing 100 tons. Classic Egyptologists say these are coffins. Yet, the granite here came from 500 miles away. Each box is so large and so heavy that there's no possible way it could fit through the existing tunnels and entrances. These supposed sarcophagi were therefore somehow built into the structure with such precision, they're within a 10,000th of an inch of being perfectly flat. In the meantime, any electrical engineer will explain that a container serving as an energy capacitor or battery must be made entirely of the same substance, so there's no interruption in the magnetic field. Could these boxes be just that? If so, there's a centuries-old granite sarcophagus on display in an Egyptian museum that's thought to be unfinished. Unlike those in the pyramids, this one's cracked, suggesting that perhaps it wasn't unfinished, but simply abandoned, because the crack which occurred would have interrupted the magnetic field, permitting it from successfully serving its purpose. So there is clear evidence to support the possibility of an electrical use. Since these supposed sarcophagi are clearly way too large for a human being, the accepted theory is that they were, yes, believe this, bull coffins for the pharaoh's prized bulls. Makes you wonder who came up with the bull coffin theory. To add to the mystery, in 1993, a mysterious and inaccessible room was discovered after remaining hidden for thousands of years. Appearing to have deliberately been concealed by the structure's engineers, the room came to be called the Queen's Chamber and was finally explored in 2011 with a small remote camera to reveal a long-lost mummy? Hardly. It contained carefully crafted copper wire, and more importantly, there were instructions painted as symbols onto the floor, which appeared to show a clear wiring diagram. Look at any battery, from those used in large power plants to the smallest pellet batteries in wristwatches, and you'll see that they require a metal, such as copper, to create the chemical reaction known as potential difference. You can run an electric current through copper wire, and the coil will produce a short-range magnetic field. Add a second coil, and the power is transferred from one coil to the other. A windowless room with copper wirings could create a higher potential on one wall, which transfers energy to the lower potential on the other wall, consequentially releasing electromagnetic energy into the confined space of the so-called Queen's Chamber. Sadly, these wires have since disappeared entirely, and mainstream Egyptologists claim there's no functionality whatsoever to this room, as they also claim there's no functionality of anything in this structure beyond the ways it serves as a tomb. Good place to note, however, that the foremost Egyptologist, Zahi Hawass, was indicted for theft of Egyptian antiquities. It could still be argued that the electrical materials used to construct the Great Pyramid are simply coincidental, because an energy generator still requires a catalyst from another source. Perhaps then this explains why the pyramids are geographically located over a powerful natural generator. Underground rivers and aquifers, physioelectricity could be harnessed from the power of the current as the water flows. And it has been proven that thousands of years ago, the Nile River passed directly by where the structures now stand. Of course, this brings in a debate about the age of the pyramids themselves, along with the weathering on the nearby Sphinx, indicating that the monuments are actually double the age they're currently assumed to be. Perhaps that would explain why there's no mention of the pyramids or their creation in any of the Egyptian writings. So if water was a source of power, it would have traveled up the limestone based on the principle of capillary action, which happens when a small area of a substance that gets wet absorbs into the entire area of that substance. So water flowing near or underneath the pyramid could have been absorbed as it passed over the limestone, even traveling upward to the top of the structure. The quartz in the tunnels of the pyramids would subject to the stress or vibration, creating piezoelectricity. The high force, speed of the rising water, and the pressure would be analogous to filling a syringe, generating electromagnetic energy within the structure by the materials within it, and conducting it upwards to the now missing capstone. But why? The geographical location of the pyramid may give us some clues. It is located exactly at a point which magnifies the electromagnetic forces on the planet, where telluric currents are at their strongest. There's an electromagnetic field at the bottom of the pyramid, which would rise to the upper layers with these chemical reactions. We don't know for sure what capped the pyramid, but there is speculation that it may have been gold, explaining, of course, why it's long since been missing. If it were gold, this could have created a conductive path for energy to be directed upwards, high into the ionosphere. superconductive materials were used to create this monument for energy, then the potential for something even more amazing might have been possible. Wireless electricity. Sound far-fetched? One bold and extraordinary man swore this was possible, and he may have showed us how. We know of Nikola Tesla as the solitary genius responsible for the electric engine, radio, laser, radar, and for creating a tremendous competitive spirit in Thomas Edison. We know Tesla sought above all to serve mankind. In fact, despite his extraordinary contributions, he's scarcely known or credited for his genius. At the 1893 World's Fair, Tesla transmitted electricity naturally to a light bulb he held in his hands, and he created a Tesla coil, which is used more today for show than for the function it was intended to serve. Most importantly, we know that Tesla claimed adamantly that he had perfected the method of harnessing and transmitting free wireless energy using the electromagnetic nature of the planet. In a patent Tesla filed in September of 1897, we know of Nikola Tesla as the solitary genius responsible for the electric engine, radio, laser, radar, and for creating a tremendous competitive spirit in Thomas Edison. We know Tesla sought above all to serve mankind. In fact, despite his extraordinary contributions, he's scarcely known or credited for his genius. At the 1893 World's Fair, Tesla transmitted electricity naturally to a light bulb he held in his hands, and he created a Tesla coil, which is used more today for show than for the function it was intended to serve. Most importantly, we know that Tesla claimed adamantly that he had perfected the method of harnessing and transmitting free wireless energy using the electromagnetic nature of the planet. In a patent Tesla filed in September of 1897, he claimed that at 30,000 feet altitude, there's a stratum of rarefied air that would conduct electric currents at high voltages. In this proposed system was a transmitter which would transmit millions of volts into the atmosphere. Then he had something receive the electricity and reduce the voltage to a convenient potential to be used by consumers. In an experiment the last week of July in 1903, nearby residents claimed to have witnessed Tesla successfully conduct his experiment at the Wardenstein Tower, while Tesla himself, sharing his new method of conductivity, said that it lit up the night sky as if it were a giant fluorescent tube. It's even been said that he successfully wirelessly transmitted pictures and sounds. Though all of his work has been mercilessly destroyed, this cannot be proven. Sadly, Tesla's technology was confiscated shortly after his death. He died in poverty, and the U.S. government destroyed his tower, claiming it was being used by German spies. Had Tesla succeeded in his mission, the distribution of power on this planet would have been very different today. Compare Tesla's technology to the pyramids. The location, height, and electromagnetic materials. We've seen induction between copper wires work for short distances. For long-distance transfer, the same principle can be applied when acoustic energy is converted to kinetic energy and the frequencies match. The way an opera singer can shatter a glass when the sound wave he is singing matches the resonant frequency of the glass. So if there's a magnetically oscillating current and you create a second possessing the same frequency, the wireless transmission can pass through solid materials and through long distances. The frequency which would have been released from the pyramid would have to have been matched in the surrounding area. Perhaps this would explain the obelisks, the tall monuments which could be acting as receivers, particularly if there's a quartz stone at the top of them. This would also explain the ancient carvings in Egypt, which so clearly indicate light sources, it's boggling to think anyone would even argue it. In the Hathor Temple, the Dendera light is one such image. It perfectly resembles modern electrical technology, showing a wire inside of a bulb-like area and a box which appears to be a receiver. Across from this carving is a similar image, but the system appears to be falling into the hands of a reptilian-looking being, as though it's a warning of the potential to abuse his technology. Mainstream historians scoff and make more primitive conclusions, but still, the pyramids show no sign of soot from flame torches. Instead, there are multiple carvings which show these antenna-like objects that appear to be a transmitter, near another object, shaped like the famous symbol, the Ankh, which appears to be the receiver. Given all this, it seems so much more believable that the Great Pyramid functioned using the same principles and conditions as Tesla sought to demonstrate, that they conducted and directed electromagnetic energy into the ionosphere, where it generated and transmitted electricity wirelessly to receivers within the civilization. We've long believed that the pyramids were just tombs, but this theory raises more questions than it answers. Why do they have nothing in common with other tombs? Why the unique construction materials made to build it, including the very materials required for conducting power? Why the oversized granite boxes proven to have never contained any mummies? Or the ones that are clearly too large for humans? Why the alignment of the North Pole, the 20-ton swivel doors, intricate tunnels and chambers, shafts, and areas still yet to be discovered? Why is there no soot from fire torches anywhere inside the structure? And why do the tunnels protrude deep into the earth? These mysteries still elude our understanding, but more and more people are accepting the possibility that the Great Pyramid of Giza had a more important function than we understand. We know there is a heightened electromagnetic measurement around the pyramid that's equivalent to that made in an electrical storm. We also know that if you look at them from space, you can see that they're actually 8-sided, not 4-sided, and that there are strange heat spots observable only with special equipment. They have unique electric materials, including copper, and a design that suggests high pressure and water power. They have a powerful magnetic structure and placement over the telluric currents. They're aligned with the stars, and the unique art of the area shows clear depictions of wired light sources. All these things suggest there's a lot more to this story than we've been told. All these circumstances make the likelihood high. The pyramid was created to be a compact energy generator and a broadcasting system that transmitted electricity wirelessly. The implications for this understanding of electrical power by an ancient culture is huge. It would rewrite history as we know it. Do you think that free energy could be transmitted wirelessly around the world? And whether or not you do believe that, do you think that if it really could do that, we would actually know about it? Thank you for watching.
Yep.
And hit the like button if you
I've seen you talk about the fact that you climbed up the pyramid 5 times. I think you said that, right?
Yeah.
And when you go there to the Sphinx of Giza, and you're there, right? The Great Sphinx of Giza. What do the locals say when you talk to them? Is there a debate of what it is?
Well,
Do you have
the local name is Abu al-Hol, the father of terror, but nobody can really explain why. I've asked that question.
Is there any ideas, or do they have some kind of examples of
No, nobody's ever
the
given me
father
an
of
idea,
terror?
but that's how it's known, yeah.
Have researchers given opinions why it's called the father of terror?
Not that I know of, no. It's
What
just
else?
locally known. Anybody who lives in the village of Nazca.
Father of terror in Arabic, the name is a reference to a legendary sphinx that would terrorize people by making them
It's
answer
a
a riddle.
yeah, yeah.
The sphinx is a world famous monument that sits in front. So, but what?
The people who live in Nazca al-Samad, which is the village directly under the Sphinx,
Yeah.
they can't tell you why it's called Abu
But
al-Hol.
how do they feel about it? What's their, you know, like?
They're very proud of it.
In what way? Why are they proud?
Because
of
it's
it?
a beautiful, magnificent thing. It's 270 feet long, it's 70 feet high, it's towers over the Nile River, it looks out due east over the basin of the Nile. And fundamentally, because it is a worldwide icon, it's something that Egypt rightly is very proud of. Nobody else has the Great Sphinx of Giza. Plenty of people have got pyramids, but nobody else has got the Great Sphinx. So there's a sense of pride for the whole Giza Plateau, that it's something special that Egypt has, which other cultures don't have.
What's the story that they tell when they're having kids and their kids go to school? What story do they tell on what happened there?
When I've talked to Egyptians, local Egyptians living in Nazdat al-Samara, they believe that the Sphinx is much, much older than the time of the dynastic Egyptians.
Really?
They believe that it's as old as time itself.
They believe it's as old as time itself. And why do they believe that?
Well, just look at it. That's why. Those erosion patterns around the side. There's a sense, a feeling of great antiquity about it. Of course, they're not looking up encyclopedias and going into the archaeological textbooks. They're just giving a gut reaction to this amazing thing.
So when you talked about what it took to build a pyramid, right? The stats you gave, you said it's 6 million tons, 481 feet high.
Correct.
You can say probably better than that.
I'll say it exactly. The calculated weight is 6 million tons. The height is presently around 450 feet. But that's because the top 30 feet of the Great Pyramid came off in an earthquake around about the year 1300. So when you calculate the angle of slope, and it's 52 degrees angle of slope on each side, and project it further beyond the broken off top, you'll find that the original height of the Great Pyramid was 481 feet in height. Right now it's about 450.
How studied and researched is it? And what do we not, I mean, I guess the question would be, how studied and researched is it? The pyramid.
Well, I would say that this is amongst the most excavated and most studied archaeological sites in the entire world. So it's amazing that they're still finding new things there. For example, there's been using a high-tech scanning equipment, muon scanning, I believe. Just in the last 3 years, enormous cavities have been identified within the Great Pyramid, which nobody knew were there. There's a huge feature, famous feature within the Great Pyramid called the Grand Gallery. And it looks like there's another Grand Gallery.
Niggas lost.
Which has been identified by scanning, but nobody's got into it yet. Yeah, you can see it in some of those. No, that's the Grand Gallery. But you can also see the scanning there.
Zoom in.
But there's the Grand Gallery, and above it is the Scan Pyramid's big void. Well, nobody knew that was there until very, very recently, and it's not the only void that's in the Great Pyramid. So we're still finding out about new things about the Great Pyramid. Now, that void could be an architectural feature. It appears to slope at the same angle as the Grand Gallery. Or it might not be. It might just be, it's hard to understand why a sort of random vacant space would be left in this monument. But the fact is, all we know at the moment is that there's this huge cavity inside the pyramid that nobody has yet got into. And it isn't the only part of the pyramid. Out of the Queen's Chamber, so-called, when we call the chambers of the pyramids Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, there's no basis for that. There's no evidence that any queen was ever buried in the Great Pyramid. Nor is there any evidence that any king, any pharaoh was ever buried in the Great Pyramid, because no pharaonic burial was ever found inside it. But there's the Queen's Chamber. And on the right-hand wall and on the left-hand wall, there are 2 little shafts cut into the wall. Actually, those shafts were invisible until, I believe it was 1872, when a curious British researcher went around tapping on the walls of the Queen's Chamber. He had a reason to do that, because the King's Chamber, I suspect that's a King's Chamber one. Yeah, the King's Chamber shafts were already known. There were shafts in the King's Chamber, and actually you could find their exit on the outside of the pyramid. You could roll a cannonball down them and they would end up in the King's Chamber. So, but there's no exit for the Queen's Chamber shafts. But he figured, look, if there's shafts in the King's Chamber, maybe there's shafts in the Queen's Chamber too. So he went around tapping on the walls, and sure enough, he found 2 hollow points. People didn't care about vandalism in those days. He got out a hammer and chisel and just hammered them through, and lo and behold, there's a horizontal passageway, and then it's leading up at an angle. It's about that high and that wide. Let's say 8 inches high and 8 inches wide. It's just very, very small. You can't get a human being in there. But back in the 90s, a special robot was designed, which was sent up there, sent up the southern shaft first. And what it found, after a journey of more than 160 feet, what it found was a door, a little stone door with 2 metal handles blocking the shaft. So the question is, what lies beyond that door? A new robot was designed with a drill on the front of it. They send the robot back up the shaft. They drill a hole in that door. What do they see when the camera goes through that hole? They see a cavity about 4 feet wide and another door at the end of that, closed, shut. And of course, they've not been able to drill through that one yet. So it's the same story on the other shaft as well. So what we're getting is evidence that the Great Pyramid still has many secrets to reveal. Years of study. In some ways, you could say thousands of years of study, and you can definitely say 150 years of detailed archaeological study have still not got to the bottom of the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. They've not solved how it was built. There are many theories as to how it was built.
But this is roughly 2,000, 2,500 BC, right? Something like that.
Yeah, that's the establishment date for the construction of the Great Pyramid. I don't have a big problem with that date. I think in the Great Pyramid we're looking at a multi-generational project. I completely reject the notion that the Great Pyramid was a tomb and only a tomb, which is what Egyptologists say. And I reject the notion that this massive, incredibly precise monument, because it is almost perfectly aligned to true north, south, east and west, that it could have been built in the 23 years of Khufu's reign. I mean, you don't start building your own tomb until you're actually on the throne. So he was on the throne for 23 years, and that's what Egyptologists say, the pyramid was built in 23 years. I can't accept that. Nobody who's got a background in engineering and construction who I've talked to can accept that either. This thing couldn't be built in 23 years, unless there was some kind of extraordinary technology that the ancient Egyptians possessed, which we don't yet know that they possessed. It looks much more likely that it was built up over a long period of time, but that undoubtedly the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty finished it off and put the casing stones that were once on the outside of the Great Pyramid. But I'm of the opinion, and again this is just my view based on my own research and my own work, is that what stood at the Giza Plateau 12,500 years ago was the Sphinx in the form of a lion. Were some megalithic temples. There's a huge megalithic temple called the Bali Temple right next door to the Great Sphinx. Again, there's nothing that connects it in writing that connects it to any particular epoch, but it has blocks of stone that weigh 100 tons each. Those are also heavily weathered, just as the Sphinx is. So my suggestion is that on the Giza Plateau you have a number of megalithic temples which still stand. You have the Great Sphinx, and you had ground platforms, not very high, where the 3 pyramids were built, laid out in a very specific, very precise angle to one another. And that precise angle matches the angle of the, yes, this is the Bali Temple, and what we're looking at there is exactly an interesting point, because you're looking at granite blocks that were put there in Old Kingdom times that face limestone blocks. And it's those limestone blocks that are behind those granite blocks. You can see them if you look right to the back.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the limestone blocks that haven't been covered with facing stones. So just as we believe that the Sphinx was restored by the pharaohs, we also, I'm speaking about, I and my colleagues, are also of the opinion that the Bali Temple was restored by the pharaohs. But what they found was a much, much, much older monument, which they treasured and valued and venerated.
You've climbed all the way to the top 5 times, you said, right?
I have.
Now let me ask you, when you climb all the way, are you tied to anything, or is it open like this? Rob, because I just found a video of somebody climbing all the way to the top, and this is, can you play this clip, Rob, the one I just sent you? So this is a fellow, I don't know who this is.
Yeah.
They posted this video. Is this literally what it looks like when you climb to the top?
You bet. That's exactly what it looks like. It's mountaineering to a certain extent.
I mean, if you fall, you're falling.
If you're more than 20 feet up and you fall, you're pretty much certain to be dead. If you're 200 feet up, you definitely will be dead. People die every year climbing the Great Pyramid.
How do you come down carefully? Because this is essentially 45 stories high.
Yeah, that's right. You come down very carefully. I was actually on one of the climbs that I and my wife Santa did. I was ahead, and I reached up to
Pause, right?
some of the blocks. Some of the blocks are only this high. Some of them are almost 6 feet high, and you have to pull yourself up onto them. The courses vary in height from course to course, and I was levering myself. I got hold of the top of the block, and I was pulling myself up onto that so that I could get my knees onto it and get on top. When the limestone that I was holding, which was very eroded, broke off in my hands, I fell back. Fortunately, my wife was right behind me, and she pushed me very, very hard and stopped me falling. But that could have been the end of me.
I just searched right
Which
now.
many Egyptologists would wish it perhaps had been.
I'm sure they would, but I just searched the following, Rob. How many people died climbing the Great Pyramid, okay? And the number shows 1,600, over 1,600 people have died climbing the pyramid in the last 200 years. I can see that, because if you fall 1, 2, 3, 4, you're not going to be able to stop yourself right there. I mean, that's
No,
pretty.
The slope is 52 degrees. It's a steep slope, and once you start rolling, you're gone. There's no way. That's why people get killed.
What do you feel like when you're all the way at the top? Is there an energy you feel? Is there when you're looking around? What are you thinking? What are you feeling when you're all the way at the top?
It's a magnificent and majestic place to be. There's first of all a sense of relief. I got to the top
How long did it take on average?
For me, about 25 to 30 minutes to do the climb. There was a gentleman, in fact, the gentleman who helped me was my first climb of the Great Pyramid, who's now passed away. He was known locally as Champion, because back in the 1930s and 40s, people used to run races up the Great Pyramid. And he was able to run up the Great Pyramid and do the climb in 11 minutes. Well, I'm not as fit as he was, so in my case, about 25 minutes to half an hour.
That's still good though, to get up there in 25.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's
Yeah.
pretty good.
So, okay, play the other clip, Rob, the other one that shows the inside of it, and this is just kind of giving a glimpse. This is apparently what Harvard put together. Can you get out to kind of
Well, that's a good place to be, actually. That's a good place to be, because that's Mamun, that's called Mamun's Hole.
Thanks to Harvard University, you can virtually not enter the pyramid. Okay,
Yeah.
can you show that, Rob? Go back and play the clip, and maybe you can narrate this for us while we're looking.
Sure.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, go back to the beginning. I need to explain to you what we're actually looking at here. Can I do that?
Yeah, please, go for it, yes.
What we're looking at here is the result of an Arab investigation of the Great Pyramid in the 9th century under a caliph called Caliph al-Mamun, who was very curious about antiquities. And he was already aware of other pyramids in Egypt in which the entrance was in the north face. As a matter of fact, the entrance to all Egyptian pyramids is in the north face. But at that time, the true entrance of the Great Pyramid was not visible, because all of the sides were sheerly covered sheer with beautiful polished limestone facing stones, some of which individually could weigh as much as 16 tons. They were completely covered and closed the pyramid, and nobody knew where the entrance was. It seems that in ancient times there was a way to open that doorway, to open those facing stones and to get in. But nobody knew in the 9th century where it was. So Caliph al-Mamun got together a gang of workers with sledgehammers and chisels, and he went up onto the north face of the Great Pyramid, roughly where he thought the door might be, and he started breaking his way in. And what we're looking at here is a man-made tunnel physically forced into the Great Pyramid and generally known as Mamun's Hole.
Have you walked through this?
You bet. I've walked through it more times than I can count. And that now is the entrance through which tourists enter the Great Pyramid.
What floor is this on? Is this?
Oh, it's about 25 feet up, maybe
25 feet up,
maybe
okay.
30 feet up. But the true entrance, of course, has now been found, and it's a little bit above Mamun's Hole, and you can see that there are slabs of stone in a kind of that sort of shape, like an A figure, which block it. If you search for true entrance to the Great Pyramid, you can see it as well. There it's a little bit above Mamun's Hole, but nobody who goes to the Great Pyramid today goes in through that true entrance. They all go in through Mamun's Hole.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's
okay.
right. That's actually the real entrance to the Great Pyramid.
And are you actually able to go on through it?
No, because at a certain point, this is another of the curiosities, is that the internal passageway system of the Great Pyramid was deliberately blocked with gigantic granite blocking stones. So when the Mamun and his team broke in, they didn't know exactly where they were going, but as they got deeper into that cavern that you were showing us, as they got deeper into that, hammering away, they suddenly heard something very large falling in a nearby space. There was a space nearby where something huge fell, and that struck them as interesting. They knew where the sound came from. They started heading for that, and they found themselves in what is called the ascending corridor of the Great Pyramid, and underneath them, behind where they cut in, were these huge granite not facing stones, huge granite blocking stones, which blocked that passageway. But they had gone round them and found themselves in the passageway system, and from there it was clear running. They could go up the ascending corridor, they could enter the Queen's Chamber, they could then continue on up the Grand Gallery, and they could come to the King's Chamber. That was the situation once they'd broken in and found the original system.
So what did they, so this right here, Rob, just if you don't mind watching it one time all the way
sure.
through, just to kind of get a feel.
Yeah.
Rob, if you can just play this, go for it.
What you're walking through is a man-made tunnel broken in by force.
Put it at regular speed, Rob, go ahead.
It's a tunnel that was broken into by force, roughly hacked out of the body of the Great Pyramid, which fortunately accidentally led to this, which is the ascending corridor.
So this is not built, man opened this up.
Yes, there's, okay, the complications of the Great Pyramid are beyond belief. There's an ascending corridor, but there's also a descending corridor.
Were these stairs there, or did somebody build them?
No, those stairs have been put in modern times.
Got it.
They did not exist. Let's keep on going down. Let's keep on going down.
So we're going down now?
No, yeah, let's go down. Let's go down. The descending corridor. Now we're in the Queen's Chamber. No, we're not quite going the right way at the moment. We're going up. But there's two ways. You can go up or you can go down. And we did see.
That's just crazy. That's just fucking no fucking thing. That shit
then you
was.
come into the so-called subterranean chamber, cut out of bedrock, 100 feet beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. When you come up that, you then join the junction of that and the Grand Gallery, and you can then continue all the way up to the top.
How high does this route go? Like, are you going up a lot or not a lot?
You're going up hundreds of feet at a slope of 26 degrees. And by the way, that's worth making a point of too, because the external slope of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees, and every corridor, every passageway within the Great Pyramid slopes at 26 degrees. That's, of course, half of 52. So we know that geometers and mathematicians were at work. It's not an easy, once you get to the Grand Gallery, it's fine, because that's almost 30 feet high. But when you're going up the ascending corridor or going down the ascending corridor, you're in a passageway, I should call it. You're in a passage that is about 3 feet 5 inches in height. Now that means that you're going to have to bend over double, pretty much, to go down it. And what I've learned from years of exploration of the Great Pyramid is that if you're going down one of those passageways, it's better to go down backwards, because then you don't keep smashing your head on the top of it. If you go down forwards, you're going to bump your head 5 times by the time you get to the bottom. But if you go down backwards, that doesn't happen. Anyway, it's very difficult to, particularly for anybody who's unwell, to actually go up there.
You're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this, but the last 13 and a half years I've been working on my first fiction book to write, ever. Fiction book to write. And while I finished this book, a year ago, I got the strangest phone call about one of the characters in a book where the guy wanted to meet with me, and he read the book. And afterwards, it's like, wait a minute, am I the villain in the book? This is a story about a character named Asher, who is half Armenian, half Assyrian, whose father was involved in the Iranian Revolution, linked to Sabah, working with the Shah, that they escape and he gets recruited to a secret society. Well, when you go to the secret society, it's been around for a couple thousand years. They've developed some of the craziest leaders of all time. And they test you. There's unique tests that they have at the society where they test to see your emotional mental toughness. One of the tests that they have is very rigorous. It's purely mental. Of course, there's a physical one, but one is mental and emotional. If you're Armenian, if you're Syrian, if you're Persian, this is a book you're going to be reading and saying, holy moly, this is the kind of stuff you talk about in here? Yes. If you're somebody that's fascinated by history, this is a book for you. Characters. There's a technology that this society, secret society, builds where you go into a vault. I won't spoil it for you when you go down. They have a technology where you get to sit down and watch and have a 3-4 hour conversation with Tupac. You can set up a debate between Karl Marx And Ayn Rand, Karl Marx is in the book, who wrote Communist Manifesto. Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, is in the book. Marilyn Monroe explains the concept of seduction and sex in the book. When you read the book, it's about development of the next leaders in the world and how they do it and how they've been doing it for many years. And it's also about how to prevent the end of civilization and how this organization goes about doing it. So, I've never written a parenting book before, but if I ever wrote a parenting book, this is the closest thing to it because it's all mindset, a lot of crazy stories. Again, 13 and a half years. Trust me, I told myself I will not publish this book until I sell my insurance company and I'm fully disconnected from it, where it's no longer my responsibility 100%. When you read this, if you're a creative person, if you like fiction books, if you enjoyed Atlas Shrugged, if you enjoy Divergent, if you like books like that, I think you're gonna enjoy reading this book. It's the creative side. Business books is very easy. Here's how you do it, here's how this how it works. This is very creative. If you haven't placed the order yet, now you can order it on Simon & Schuster, Amazon. I'm going to put the link up below somewhere here, maybe even in my profile. Go order the book and read it. I've never written a book where I can't wait to read your reviews to see what you think about this book. So, I'm going on this wild journey, and we have some plans with this book here. If you support the things that I work on, I would appreciate you going and reading the book, order the book on Amazon, and then post a review.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.
Life doesn't always go as planned, which is why Domino's is giving you an emergency pizza. A free pizza to use when you need it most. Get your emergency pizza when you order Domino's online.
The story of our lives. Who we are. Where we came from. It's written inside of us before we were born. Everything has its breaking point. Tell me what's wrong so I can help you. Everyone who comes into this clinic is a mystery. Solve a mystery, save a life.
There's nothing to explain why he's getting worse.
You four are the smartest doctors I can find, but our patients don't need doctors. Our patients need detectives. And I promise you, we'll figure out what's wrong. To see the crime. Everyone's faces and bodies are closed. Pay attention. We'll tell you exactly where you need to go.
We don't know what we're looking for.
Something that shouldn't be there. We eliminate the impossible. Whatever remains, however, must be the truth. Must be the truth. It's quite a different life you led. It's true, Joe, I could have died. This is not an approved procedure. No one's ever tried it before.
He's also a genius.
Why would you do this?
Because no one else will.
You can see into people's bodies and their souls.
Who are you?
Once, premiered in CBS Sunday, January 26th after the AFC Championship game, streaming on Paramount+.
If we don't ask how long they last, but instead ask what's the probability that there's been any civilization at all, no matter how long they lasted. I'm not asking whether they exist now or not. I'm just asking in general about probabilities to make a technological civilization anywhere and at any time in the history of the universe. And that we were able to constrain. And so what we found was basically that there have been 10 billion trillion habitable zone planets in the universe. And what that means is those are 10 billion trillion experiments that have been run. And the only way that we're the only time that this is, this whole process from, abiogenesis to a civilization has occurred is if every one of those experiments failed, right? So therefore you could put a probability, we call it the pessimism line, right? We don't really know what nature sets for the probability of making intelligent civilizations, right? But we could set a limit using this. We could say, look, if the probability per habitable zone planet is less than 10 to the minus 22, 1 in 10 billion trillion, then yeah, we're alone. If it's anywhere larger than that, then we're not the first. It's happened somewhere else.
And to me, that was mind-blowing. It doesn't tell me there's anybody nearby. The galaxy could be sterile. It just told me that, like, unless nature's really against, has some bias against civilizations, we're not the first time this has happened. This has happened elsewhere over the course of cosmic history.
The following is a conversation with Adam Frank, an astrophysicist interested in the evolution of star systems and the search for alien civilizations in our universe. This is a Let's Streaming podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Adam Frank. You wrote a book about aliens. So the big question, how many alien civilizations are out there?
Yeah, that's the question, right? The amazing thing is that after 2.5 millennia of people yelling at each other or setting each other on fire occasionally over the answer, we now actually have the capacity to answer that question. So in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to have data relevant to the answer to that question. We're going to have hard data, finally, that will, one way or the other, even if we don't find anything immediately, we will have gone through a number of planets. We'll be able to start putting limits on how common life is. The one answer I can tell you, which was an important part of the problem, is how many planets are there, right? And just like people have been arguing about the existence of life elsewhere for 2,500 years, people have been arguing about planets for the exact same amount of time, right? You can see Aristotle yelling at Democritus about this. You can see they had very wildly different opinions about how common planets were going to be and how unique Earth was. And that question got answered, right? Which is pretty remarkable that in a lifetime you can add a 2,500-year-old question. The answer is they're everywhere. There are planets everywhere. And it was possible that planets were really rare. We didn't really understand how planets formed. And so if you go back to, say, the turn of the 20th century, there was a theory that said planets formed when two stars passed by each other closely, and then material was gravitationally squeezed out. In which case, those kinds of collisions are so rare that you would expect 1 in a trillion stars to have planets. Instead, every star in the night sky has planets.
But one of the things you've done is simulated the formation of stars. How difficult do you think it is to simulate the formation of planets, like simulate a solar system, through the entire evolution of the solar system? This is kind of a numerical simulation sneaking up to the question of how many planets are there.
That actually we're able to do now. You can run simulations of the formation of planetary systems. So if you run the simulation, really where you want to start is a cloud of gas, these giant interstellar clouds of gas that may have, 1 million times the mass of the sun in them. And so you run simulation of that, it's turbulent, the gas is roiling and tumbling, and every now and then you get a place where the gas is dense enough that gravity gets hold of it and it can pull it downward. So you'll start to form a protostar. And a protostar is basically the young star of this ball of gas where nuclear reactions are getting started. But it's also a disk. So as the material falls inward, because everything's rotating, as it falls inward, it'll spin up and then it'll form a disk. Material will collect in what's called an accretion disk or a protoplanetary disk. And you can simulate all of that. Once you get into the disk itself and you want to do planets, things get a little bit more complicated because the physics gets more complicated. Now you got to start worrying about dust, because actually dust is the wrong word, smoke really. These are the tiniest bits of solids. They will coagulate in the disk to form pebbles, right? And then the pebbles will collide to form rocks, and then the rocks will form boulders, et cetera, et cetera. That process is super complicated, but we've been able to simulate enough of it to begin to get a handle on how planets form, how you accrete enough material to get the first proto-planets or planetary embryos, as we call them. And then the next step is those things start slamming into each other to form, planetary cycles. Temperature of the material in the disk depends on how far away you are from the star. So it decreases, right? And so there's a really interesting point. So close to the star, temperatures are really high, and the only thing that can condense, that can kind of freeze out is going to be stuff like metals. So that's why you find Mercury is this giant ball of iron, basically. And then as you go further out, stuff, the gas gets cooler, and now you can start getting things like water to freeze, right? So there's something we call the snow line, which is somewhere in our solar system out around between Mars and Jupiter. And that's the reason why the giant planets in our solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all have huge amounts of ice in them, or water and ice. Actually, Jupiter and Saturn don't have so much, but the moons do. The moons have so much water in them that there's oceans, right? We've got a number of those moons that have got more water on them than there's water on Earth.
Do you think it's possible to do that kind of simulation to have a stronger and stronger estimate of how likely an Earth-like planet is? Can we get the physics simulation done well enough to where we can start estimating, like, what are the possible Earth-like things that could be generated?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we're learning how to do that now. So, one part is like trying to figure out how planets form themselves and doing the simulations. Like that cascade from dust grains up to planetary embryos, that's hard to simulate because it's both, you got to do both the gas and you got to do the dust and the dust colliding and all that physics. Once you get up to a planet-sized body, then you kind of have to switch over to almost like a different kind of simulation. There, often what you're doing is you're assuming the planet is this sort of spherical ball, and then you're doing like a 1D, a radial calculation. You're just asking like, all right, how is this thing going to, what's the structure of it going to be? Like, am I going to have a solid iron core, or am I going to get a solid iron core with that liquid iron core out around it like we have on Earth? And then you get, a silicate, kind of a rocky mantle, and then a crust. All those details, those are kind of beyond being able to do full 3D simulations from ab initio, from scratch. We're not there yet.
How important are those details, like the crust and the atmosphere, do you think?
Hugely important. So I'm part of a collaboration at the University of Rochester where we're using the giant laser. It's literally, this is called the Laboratory for Laser Energetics. We got a huge grant from the NSF to use that laser to like slam tiny pieces of silica to understand what the conditions are like at, the center of the Earth, or even more importantly, the center of super Earths. Like this is what's wild. The most common kind of planet in the universe we don't have in our solar system, which is amazing, right? So we've been able to study enough or observe enough planets now to get a census. We kind of have an idea of who's average, who's weird. And our solar system's weird because the average planet has a mass somewhere between a few times the mass of the Earth to maybe, 10 times the mass of the Earth. And that's exactly where there are no planets in our solar system. So the smaller ones of those we call super Earths, the larger ones we call sub-Neptunes. And they're anybody's guess. Like, we don't really know what happens to material when you're squeezed to those pressures, which is like millions, tens of millions of times the pressure on the surface of the Earth. So those details really will matter of what's going on there because that will determine whether or not you have, say, for example, plate tectonics. We think plate tectonics may have been really important for life on Earth, for the evolution of complex life on Earth. So it turns out, and this is sort of the next generation where we're going with the understanding the evolution of planets and life. It turns out that you actually have to think hard about the planetary context for life. You can't just be like, oh, there's a warm pond, and then some interesting, chemistry happens in the warm pond. You actually have to think about the planet as a whole and what it's gone through in order to really understand whether a planet is a good place for life or not.
Why do you think plate tectonics might be useful for the formation of complex life?
There's a bunch of different things. One is that, the Earth went through a couple of phases of being a snowball planet. Like we went into a period of glaciation where pretty much the entire planet was under ice. The oceans were frozen. Early on in Earth's history, there was barely any land. We were actually a water world. So, it's just a couple of Australia-sized cratons, they called them, protocontinents. So we went through these snowball Earth phases. And if it wasn't for the fact that we had kind of an active plate tectonics, which had a lot of volcanism on it, we could have been locked in that forever. Like once you get into a snowball state, a planet can be trapped there forever, which is, maybe you already had life form, but then because it's so cold, you may never get anything more than just microbes, right? So what plate tectonics does is because it fosters more volcanism, is that you're going to get carbon dioxide dioxide pumped into the atmosphere, which warms the planet up and gets you out of the snowball Earth phase. But even more, there's even more really important things. I just finished a paper where we were looking at something called the hard steps model, which is this model that's been out there for a long time that purports to say intelligent life in the universe will be really rare. And it made all these assumptions about the Earth's history, particularly that the history of life and the history of the planet have nothing to do with each other. And it turns out, as I was doing the reading for this, that Earth probably early on had a more mild form of plate tectonics, and then somewhere about 1 billion years ago it ramped up. And that ramping up changed everything on the planet, because here's a funny thing. The Earth used to be flat. What I mean by that, right? All the flat earthers out there can get excited for 1 second.
Clip it.
What I mean by that is that there really weren't many mountain ranges, right? The beginning of, I think the term is orogenesis, mountain building, the true Himalayan-style giant mountains, didn't happen until this more robust form of plate tectonics, where the plates are really being driven around the planet. And that is when you get the crusts hitting each other, and they start pushing, into these Himalayan-style mountains. The weathering of that, the erosion of that, puts huge amounts of nutrients, things that microbes want to use, into the oceans, and then what we call the net primary productivity, the bottom of the food chain, how much sugars they're producing, how much photosynthesis they're doing, shot up by a factor of almost 1,000, right? So that the fact that you had plate tectonics supercharged evolution in some sense. We're not exactly sure how it happened, but it's clear that the amount of life, the amount of living activity that was happening, really got a boost from the fact that suddenly there was this new vigorous form of plate tectonics.
So it's nice to have turmoil in terms of temperature, in terms of surface geometries, in terms of the chemistry of the planet, turmoil.
Yeah, that's actually really true, because what happens is, if you look at the history of life, that's an excellent point you're bringing up. If you look at the history of life on Earth, we get, abiogenesis somewhere around at least 3.8 billion years ago. And that's the first microbes. They kind of take over enough that they really do, you get a biosphere that is actively changing the planet. But then you go through this period they call the boring billion, where it's 1 billion years and it's just microbes. Nothing's happening, it's just microbes. I mean, microbes are doing amazing things. They're inventing fermentation, thank you very much. We appreciate that. But it's not until sort of you get probably these continents slamming into each other, you really get the beginning of continents forming and driving changes that evolution has to respond to. That on a planetary scale, this turmoil, this chaos, is creating new niches as well as closing other ones. And biology, evolution has to respond to that. And somewhere around there is when you get the Cambrian explosions, when suddenly every body plan, evolution goes on an orgy, essentially. So yeah, it does look like that chaos or that turmoil was actually very helpful to evolution.
I wonder if there is some extremely elevated levels of chaos, almost like catastrophes, behind every leap of evolution. Like, you're not going to have leaps. Like in human societies, you have like an Einstein that comes up with a good idea, but it feels like on an evolutionary time scale, you need some real big drama going on for the evolutionary system to have to come up with a solution to that drama, like an extra complex solution to that drama.
Well, I think I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know if it needs to be like an almost extinction event, right?
Right.
Because it's certainly true that we have gone through almost extinction events, or we've had, 5 mass extinctions. But you don't necessarily see that there was this giant evolutionary leap happening after those. So, with the comet impact, the KT boundary, certainly, lots of niches opened up. And that's why we're here, right? Because, our ancestors were just little, basically, rodents, rats, living under the footsteps of the dinosaurs. And it was that comet impact that opened the route for us. But it wasn't, it still took another, 65 million years. It wasn't like this thing immediately happened. But what we found with this hard steps paper, because the whole idea of the hard steps paper was, it was one of these anthropic reasoning kinds of things, where Brandon Carter said, oh, look, the intelligence doesn't show up on Earth until about, almost close to when the end of the sun's lifetime. And so he's like, well, there should be no reason why the sun's lifetime and the time for evolution to produce intelligence should be the same. And so therefore he goes through all this reasoning, anthropic reasoning, and he ends up with the idea that it must be that the odds of getting intelligence are super low, and so that's the hard steps, right? So there was a series of steps in evolution that were, very, very hard, and because of that you can calculate some probability distributions, and everybody loves a good probability distribution, and they went a long way with this, but it turns out that the whole thing is flawed, because on one, when you look at it, of course the time scale for the sun's evolution and the time scale for evolution on light are coupled, because light and the time scale for evolution of the Earth is coupled, is about the same time scale as the evolution as the sun. It's billions of years. The Earth evolves over billions of years. And light and the Earth co-evolve. That's what Brandon Carter can see, is that actually the fate of the Earth and the fate of light are inextricably combined. And this is really important for astrobiology too. Life doesn't happen on a planet, it happens to a planet. So this is something that David Grinspoon and Sarah Walker both say, and I agree with this. It's a really nice way of putting it. Plate tectonics, the evolution of oxygen, of an oxygen atmosphere, which only happened because of light. These things, these are things that are happening where life and the planet are sort of sloshing back and forth. And so rather than, to your point about you need giant catastrophes, maybe not giant catastrophes, but what happens is as the Earth and